Beneath this cloud of hair, there is a man.
And it's me! Hello, everybody. Hello again. I literally just recorded an entire session and then realised I forgot to press record. So I've just been sitting here reading aloud to myself for like the last half an hour, which, was quite fun, really. So I'm going to do it again. It's really great to be back. I still have this kind of cough. So I'm going to have to speak a bit quietly. I almost lost my voice yesterday, but I'm going to do my best just to speak, just fairly quietly, I think, and and see how we get on. I might manage a couple of chapters. If I'm really struggling, I might end after one. Since I've already read two already, I just forgot to press record. I hope you're all okay. And I hope you're all enjoying the story so far. Alex and Z are still in solitary confinement, but they've had like a ray of hope in that somebody is down there with them. A guy called Simon, who's kind of twisted and tortured by some of the experiments inside Furnace. We don't know much about him yet, but we kind of know that he's asked Alex and Z to help him escape from the tunnels beneath the prison. And it's not just him down there, he said, there's more people. So, and there's a war going on. There's kind of like Simon and his friends down underneath Furnace. We think they're friends, we don't know yet. And there's the rats, these other kind of twisted creatures that have lost their minds, and they're kind of waging war on the black suits down there. So there's kind of a ray of hope, but we don't know yet whether Simon is good or bad. Well, some of you do. Okay. In the last chapter, Simon took Alex and Z to a storeroom just to kind of talk to them a little bit about what's going on. As they were leaving, he caught basically a rat, one of these humanoid creatures, and killed it and then ate it right in front of them, which is pretty gross, but which is also making me feel a bit hungry. Okay, here we go. Preparation. Again. We scrambled back towards our cells, gripping each other's overalls, too frightened to let go, stopping only once at the bend in the corridor to make sure the coast was clear. There wasn't a living thing in sight, the rock walls so still that time could have stopped, the air silent except for our hoarse breaths. "You're not thinking of getting back in the hole," Z whispered frantically. "We should go now, make a run for it while there's no one here. We might not get another chance." "We can't go," I replied as calmly as I could. "We don't know where we're going, and we're dead if we run into a black suit or one of those things." "We're dead if we stay," Z shouted back, too loud. He broke his hold. "I'm not getting back in there." I ignored him, knowing that somebody could appear at any moment. Compared to what I'd heard, what I'd seen, being torn to shreds by shotgun pellets was a pretty good way to go. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. Jogging to the first hatch, I kicked out the stubborn lever with my heel, managing to spin it enough to unlock the cell. Z was still talking at my back, but I shut him up with the fiercest look I could muster. "Z, you have to trust me. This is the only way. The warden's given us a month down here, and nothing else is going to happen until that time is up. Right now, the hole is the safest place we can be." I thought about the rat that had tried to break into my cell, but I shoved the image from my head before it could take root. "If you make a run for it now, you're as good as dead. We've got to come up with a plan, find a way out, then we'll go together. Trust me." "I do trust you, Alex," he said, walking up to the cells. "It's that thing I don't trust, that boy." "We don't know anything about him." "We know he's one of us," I replied. Then, as if to try to convince myself, "He is one of us." I bent down and grabbed the lever, straining to lift Z's hatch. After a couple of seconds, he appeared at my side and grabbed the lip, and together we managed to haul the solid steel manhole cover open. We did the same thing with mine, then stood in silence, staring into the infinite blackness of solitary confinement. "I can't spend much more time in there," Z said eventually. "I'm seeing things, things that aren't there, things that come out of the walls. I think there might be bugs in my cell." I looked up at him, and for the first time I noticed how thin he was, how frail, his eyes watery, his skin grey and loose and streaked with dirt like unwashed laundry. He caught my glance and mirrored my expression. I knew I must have looked just as bad. For a second, he smiled at me, nothing more than a glint, and I snorted a laugh. "Don't we make a pretty picture?" he said. "Yeah, but it's good to have a conversation without beating the hell out of my toilet," I replied, offering another dry hiss of a laugh. He nodded, then leaned forward and gave me a hug. It was unexpected, but the feeling of contact after all this time was euphoric. I returned it, slapping him on the back a couple of times like I'd seen my dad do to his male friends. Then we separated. "Tell anyone we did that and I'll deny it," he said as he sat on the edge of his cell. He dropped in, disappearing like a rock in a tar pit, his voice muffled. "Just find a way, okay? Get us the hell out of here, and soon." I nodded, pulling on the hatch until it got caught by its own weight and slammed shut. The lever wouldn't turn all the way, but with another few kicks I managed to slot it back into its casing. I sat on the edge of my cell, the floor invisible beneath me, and wondered if Z had been right. Maybe we should have made a break for it while we still could. Maybe it was the height of stupidity not to have gone when our cells were open and the corridors were abandoned. But my gut was telling me we'd be dead in minutes if we fled. As ridiculous as it was, I knew we had to lock ourselves away before we could set ourselves free. Grabbing the edge of my hatch, I tilted it forwards until it was vertical, then I slid into my cell, pulling it behind me. It fell like a ton weight, the change in pressure making my ears ache as if I dived too deep in the pool. I swallowed, twisting my jaw until they popped, then leaned back against the wall. "Honey, I'm home!" I said to myself, followed by a noise that could have been a giggle but which was laced with an edge of madness that chilled me to the bone. For a while, I did nothing except stand against the wall, staring into the dark, letting the night seep into my head and snuff out the thoughts that were squabbling for attention. It worked, and for maybe a minute or so I found the closest thing I'd ever got to peace in the hole. Then I heard hurried footsteps on the ground above me, the sound of the lever on my hatch being pulled tight, and furnace forced its way back in. I pictured Simon fleeing along the corridors, heading back to some dark tunnel where he was safe from the rats and the black suits. How long had he been down here, I wondered. The first of hundreds of questions that swooped and called in my head like a flock of seagulls. His stitches looked fresh, but his skin bruised as if he'd only just escaped from the wheezers. But the way he spoke, the way he acted, was far older than his years, and made me think he'd been trapped in the underbelly of the prison for a long time. I shuddered as I pictured what he might once have looked like. A year or two older than me, and slimmer too. Had he been locked up in the hole first, tormented by his own demons, reduced to a shivering husk of a human before the wheezers got to have their way? It made sense. I mean, that was one way to avoid going crazy and solitary. Just forget who you were. Forget all you'd ever been. Is that what was happening to Donovan right now? Everything that had once defined him being stripped away like wallpaper, covered up with new personality, the psychotic menace of a black suit. I felt the anger swell inside me, making my muscles heavy and my head pound. But there was nowhere for it to go, so it just fizzled out into the shadows of my cell. Anger was quickly replaced by fear, as I wondered what our own fate was, Z's and mine. Were we doomed to be carved up inside and out, body and mind, to become black suits? Or would we fail to make the cut and be dumped, incinerated? Or worst of all, would we somehow survive and become one of them? The rats, stalking the passageways, feeding on the flesh of the guards, of the kids who'd once been our cellmates. It wasn't exactly a great menu of options. I tried to change the channel in my head. I thought about when I'd been up in my cell on top, watching the black suits and the wheezers and occasionally the warden emerge through the vault doorway from the passages beyond. I'd had no idea, none of us up there had any idea, that below our feet a battle was raging. That the calm, wicked faces that peered up at us in our cages had been fighting tooth and nail with the very freaks of nature they'd created. I wouldn't have believed it if somebody had told me. Hell, I barely even believed it now, and I'd seen the evidence with my own eyes. Feeling the ache in my legs, I slid down the wall and stretched them out before me, rubbing my skinny calves. I must have lost a ton of weight since I arrived in Furness, and I didn't exactly have pounds to spare when I got here. My mum would have loved it. She was always trying to slim down. If I did get out, if I ever reached the surface, maybe I'd send her the recipe for Furness slop. A bowl of that once every 2 days and she'd be a size 0 in no time. I wanted to laugh again, but I couldn't couldn't find the energy. Even the thought of eating slop seemed like a dream, one that made my guts feel as though they'd been compressed into a solid lump that sat in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't hungry. I was too hungry to be hungry, but I knew I was starving. Another tactic to wear us down, to make us weak, to force us to forget who we were. Next time I was in that storeroom, I'd be sure to check if there were supplies inside. I swallowed the inside of my mouth like cotton wool. Shuffling around, I ran my tongue up the wall, feeling it soak up the little moisture that was there. I felt like a cow licking its salt block, and murred softly, giggling to myself again. Yep, there was no doubt about it. I was crazy. It must have taken me half an hour to slake my thirst, after which my tongue felt numb and swollen from the rock. I lay down diagonally, staring at the patch of black where the ceiling should have been, and tried to bring some order to my thoughts. Escape. It was almost too painful to even think of the word after everything that had happened. We'd been so close. We'd allowed ourselves to believe we were free, only to be snared again. It had broken our hearts, snapped our spirits, and the thought of trying it again sat on me with greater weight than the mile of rock above my head. Even if we did find a way, who's to say it wouldn't just lead us right back to where we were now? And what were the odds that even if we did make it out of our cells, the rats wouldn't get to us? The idea sent a chill running up my spine, and more to chase it away than because I genuinely thought I could escape, I attempted to think of a plan. I started by trying to get a mental picture of the prison's underbelly. From what I'd seen of it when we were escorted to the hole, it was a labyrinth of corridors, all chipped doorways and shadowed rooms. I knew the infirmary was one of them, and a few must have been storerooms where they'd kept weapons and food and probably plenty of black suits. We'd rarely seen the guards go up in the elevator that led to the surface when we were in Gen Pop, which meant they slept down here too. How many were there? Maybe 30 black suits? It was impossible to tell because they all looked so similar. They probably each had individual rooms in another stretch of the basement. The Weezers too. What else did I know? It was pretty clear that they got their fresh water from the river. I mean, how stupid had we been, thinking that the warden hadn't known it was there? The river had probably been one of the reasons they built the prison here, one less link to the surface. Knowing about it now wasn't going to help us though, as throwing ourselves back in would be nothing more than a death sentence. I felt the claustrophobia start to set in, the weight of the world so great that I was convinced I was breathing it, darkness pouring into my lungs and making it impossible to find oxygen. For a second, panic gripped me, so hard that my entire body tensed and I could feel the blood rush in my head. Then I screwed my eyes shut and forced it out. Urged on by the frenzied beating of my heart, I tried to pick out what else I knew. This section of the prison was basically built in the tunnels and caverns of the earth, the exits sealed off by heavy steel doors like the one we'd passed on the way in. It had looked thick enough to withstand a nuke, but the rats had pulled it off its hinges as if it was tinfoil. No doubt we could find our way out into the subterranean world beyond, but what then? There was obviously no exit that way, otherwise Simon and whoever else was out there would have been long gone, and I really didn't fancy being out there in the dark with those things on the loose. Think! I mentally screamed at myself, lifting my legs up to try to get some blood to my aching back. What else? There had to be an electricity generator somewhere, probably connected to the river somehow. I didn't know much about it, but there would need to be a hell of a power source to light up the prison. Even if we found it though, what good would it do us, especially as the black suits and the beasts with their silver eyes seemed to be able to see in the dark? There was an incinerator too, Simon had said, which wasn't a fat lot of good for anything unless we found some marshmallows to toast. What did that leave? I was halfway through a spluttered sigh of desperation when I heard the lever on my hatch start to turn. I staggered off the floor, pumping myself up for another trip out of the cell. Maybe I'd get a better idea of the prison's layout this time. Maybe I'd get that whiff of fresh air, see the silver thread sparkling off towards an exit. But when the metal circle swung open, it wasn't Simon's face I saw there, it was a black suit's. He looked down at me, surprised at my determined expression and my purposeful stance. It was all I could do to stop myself saying, "Oh, it's you." But instead, I let my gaze drop to the floor and did my best to look dejected and broken and empty. The guard snorted, then slid a bowl of gunk into my cell. It hit my shoulder and spun, decorating the walls with slop. "Enjoy!" the black suit growled, kicking the hatch shut before he noticed my lips curling up into a smile. Oh, the infirmary. I woke with a scream, the nightmare of needles in my cheeks, so fresh I could still feel the sting. I pictured the bodies of the boys hanging upside down, their arms reaching for me, the gas mask pressed against my face. Panicking, I lashed out, my knuckles cracking against something solid and the pain chasing the last few scraps of dream away. "Christ!" I slurred, welcoming the darkness around me like an old friend. I ran my hands along the stone, and only when I'd covered every surface with a trembling touch did I relax. I slumped back down, rubbing my temples and cursing my brain for betraying me while I slept. I'd always had occasional nightmares, like anyone else. But most of the time I'd forget them as soon as I'd woken up. Their horror, nothing more than a bad taste in my mouth. The ones I had in Furnace, though, they were unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Terror on a completely new level. The visions of a glass prison I'd suffered so many times in general population, with my reflection that of a wheezer. And now this same recurring dream I had night after night in the hole. I could understand the fear. I mean, if dreams are a reflection of what's plaguing your subconscious, then I'd obviously be spending my nights in the company of the prison freaks. But why did I always see myself as one of the enemy? I tried to ignore the obvious answer, but it spilled into my brain. Maybe it was a glimpse of my future. "Enough!" I said, the volume of the word, after so much silence, scaring the last few flecks of dream away. To keep myself busy, I felt the floor of my cell, looking for any slop that I'd missed. I'd got most of it before falling asleep, licking the tasteless slime off the stone. It had made such a mess when it landed that there had to be specks here and there. My stomach made a noise that sounded like an earthquake, my guts squirming in pain as they cried out for food. "I'm doing my best," I told them, feeling a fleck of something suspiciously close to the toilet that was probably better left alone. I moved my search to the other corner of the cell and discovered a splotch of slop congealing in the angle between the wall and the floor. I took my time with it, savouring the minuscule amount and pretending I was stuffing my face with eggs and bacon and whatever else I used to have when my dad made a Sunday fry-up. I was enjoying the memory so much that I didn't hear the lever on my hatch until the light was already seeping in. I snapped my head up, feeling like a rat that had been caught gnawing on trash and was now cornered. For a second there was nothing but a dark silhouette against the searing light of the corridor, but then colour began to seep into the shape, and I saw that it was Simon. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the boy said, offering me his hand. "I was just trying to enjoy a quiet breakfast," I replied as he pulled me out of the cell. "Here I am thinking I'll have a nice holiday in the hole, won't get disturbed for a few weeks, but it's like Piccadilly Circus in there, what with you in the black seats and Z banging away on his toilet." Simon flashed me a puzzled look, then lowered my hatch quietly and jogged over to Z's. Seconds later he was out, the cells were secured, and we were all sprinting down the corridor again. We turned the corner, pausing for a moment to check that it was deserted, but to my surprise we passed the storeroom and ended up swinging through another door. Black suits check the storerooms more frequently now after finding the remains of that rat, Simon explained in his soft sandpaper voice as he walked across the room. It was pitch black in here, but I guessed from the echo that it must have been empty. We hunched over in the far corner, a stone's throw from the door. We got lucky today. The black suits are all busy. "Another breach?" asked Z. "No, a riot. A whole bunch of the inmates in Gen Pop tried to smash their way through room 2 to get to the river. 50 or 60 of them from the sounds of it, mainly skulls. It had been sealed off, but they all just went for it." "How do you know?" I said, excitement making my whisper louder than it should have been. "The black suits," Simon replied. "I heard them talking. They've pretty much all gone up there, except for a couple guarding the north door. They're not too pleased with you right now." "Me?" I said. "Yeah, they're blaming you for giving hope to the other kids. There must have been a couple of attempted breakouts, although nobody's managed it yet. Except you, that is. I thought the warden told them we died, said Z. Guess that don't matter. No one cares if you survived or not. The important thing is that you got out, one way or another. You made it real, the idea of escape, for them and for us down here. I wanted to ask who else was with him, but he started talking again. Speaking of which, we need to get started. We need to think of a plan, make the most of it before the black suits come back down. Okay, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. So where do we begin? The tunnels? The doors? Simon's eyes narrowed. Slivers of steel caught in the light from the door. They darted left then right as he shook his head. We start with your friend. We start in the infirmary. No. I said the word without meaning to, so loud that it reverberated around the room like a pistol shot. I clamped my mouth shut, ignoring Simon's shocked silver eyes and Z's invisible in the darkness, but burning into me with just as much heat. What? asked Z. It's Donovan, Alex. He needs our help, big time. No, I snapped back. It's just... Excuse me. Just what? That I wanted to focus on the task ahead? Try to find a way out before we risked going in for D? No. That I needed to get a better idea of the layout of the prison, just in case we were rumbled trying to break him out and had to make a quick getaway? Yeah, right. The truth was that I was terrified of the place, and the mere thought of going anywhere near it made me want to curl up and die, made me want to pretend I hated Donovan, or that I'd never known him, to forget all about him for the rest of my miserable life, just so I didn't have to find out what lay beyond that plastic curtain. That was more like it. That was the real me. The coward. I shook my head, too ashamed to try to come up with an explanation. I was grateful for the darkness, which concealed my blazing cheeks, except Simon could see me like I was lit up by a million spotlights. He knew exactly what was wrong. He knew I was afraid. I could tell by the way his head shook that doubts were starting to form. And if he decided he didn't need us, then we'd be trapped in the hole until the warden came. What about the Weezers? I asked, trying to bury my terror beneath logic. Aren't they always in the infirmary? Not always. They have to sleep too. We should be fine. Should. I managed not to question it out loud, instead saying, and the rats? Won't they be making the most of the fact the black suits are up top? There's always that danger, but I wouldn't worry too much. I haven't seen them all day. Besides, they never go in the infirmary, ever. They're scared of the place. It's where they got turned into whatever they are now. We'll be safe once we're inside. So long as the Weezers don't wake. So long as the black suits don't appear. So long as the warden doesn't find us. When we go in, Alex, you take the left-hand side. Z, the right. Find your friend. I'll keep watch. There are plenty of hiding places if things go wrong, but we really, really don't want to be there if the Weezers wake up. Okay? Okay, said Z, more tremor than voice. Okay, I said eventually, realising all eyes were still on me. We'll go get Donovan, then we'll find a way out of here. Simon was on the move before I'd even finished talking, his shadow flitting silently back across the room. For a moment I didn't think my legs were going to function, as if they were locked up and bolted to the rock. But Z tugged on my overalls, pulling me after him. We flew past the solitary cells, up the passageway where Z and I had been chased by the dogs, turning left at the junction ahead. 30 metres of growing terror, and I saw the opening in the wall, the stencilled letters. It was like being punched in the gut, and I struggled to claw in my next breath. I thought about Donovan, about my promise that I'd come back for him. I tried to remember the times he'd been there for me, but my mind drew a blank. Had he ever truly been a friend, or had he just been using me to escape? Surely the latter. I mean, why would a guy like Donovan choose to hang around with a kid like me? Oh, I hated myself then. I hated what I was thinking. But better to hate yourself and survive, right? Like I've said before so many times, I'm not a good person. I'm not a hero. I'm a criminal, a liar, a cheat, a killer. It was them or me, and I wanted to live. Then we stopped running, and Z turned to me, placed his hand on my shoulder, and that simple action knocked my cowardly train of thought off the rails. He managed a weak smile. Remember, all for one, Alex, he said. softly. "And let's get the hell out of here," I replied. He squeezed my shoulder, then dropped his hand. Simon was waiting by the curtain, staring through the translucent plastic at the blurred shapes beyond. Nothing seemed to be moving, but I could hear the relentless beeps of several heart monitors like some artificial dawn chorus. My fear still sat like a brick, weighing me down, but at least the voices had stopped, the hatred, the self-loathing. I was here for Donovan, just like he'd be here for me. He would be here for me. "We have to be quiet," Simon whispered, "and we have to be quick. Remember, take one side each. If you hear me give the alarm, then we go. No hesitation, right?" "Ready?" "No," I almost barked again, but I kept my mouth closed and settled for a nod. Z returned it, then Simon, and with a collective sigh of fear shuddering from our lips, we pushed our way through the curtain and came face to face with a wheezer. I would have cried out, but Z's legs crumpled and he fell back, slamming into me and stealing the air from my lungs. I straightened my back, grabbed hold of Z, kept him standing, desperately trying to repair the shattered pieces of my brain to come up with a plan. Any second now, the filthy creature was going to lurch forwards, stick its needles into our necks. The first thing that crossed my mind, was that it was a trap, that Simon had set us up, led us to the infirmary. I looked at him, waiting for the kid to pounce, to pin us down while the wheezer pumped us full of poison. But to my surprise, he simply held one bony finger to his lips and motioned us forward with his head. I stared at the wheezer, noticed that its eyes were closed, the lids as scarred as the rest of its hairless, weathered face, but mercifully concealing the shriveled raisin eyes within. It was breathing slowly, rhythmically, and I traced the pipe of its gas mask to see that it was connected to a socket in the wall. Every now and again it spasmed, jerking wildly, but other than that, it was still. "It's asleep," I whispered, as quietly as I was able. Simon nodded as he passed it, his deformed body still tense, ready to pounce if it showed any sign of waking. Z was still pressed against me, and I pushed him gently forwards, navigating around the silent spectre. "Why don't you just kill it now?" Z asked. "Too risky. Black suits would know it wasn't a rat. They'd know we'd been here." The wheezer didn't shift as we entered the room ahead. It was a vast room, long rather than wide, the flesh-coloured walls rising to a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Countless lights hung down on long cords like spiders, swinging gently even though there was no breeze. The glow emanating from each one was so thick and so red that it could have been raining blood. At the far end, another door led away into darkness, but our attention was gripped by what was before us. Lined up along both sides of the room were two seemingly endless rows of screens made up of steel frames and white cloth curtains, the kind you see in hospitals to provide privacy. But a hospital ward usually contained perhaps a dozen well-spaced beds. Here there must have been 100 of them, so close to each other they were almost touching. All the curtains were drawn tight, but I knew that behind each one was a bed occupied by some poor kid who'd been stolen from Furness. I didn't want proof, but it was there anyway. Pitiful groans rose up from hidden faces. Quiet sobs tore at my heart, a symphony of distress almost lost in the chirrup of the monitors, the pump of some hidden machine, and the endless wheeze of the sleeping monster by my side. Shh, you wake the wheezer. Simon waved his hand, snapping me back to attention. Donovan was in here somewhere, and we didn't have long to find him. I darted to the left-hand side of the room, took a deep breath and pulled back the cloth of the first screen. Empty. There was a bed, metal sides and a thin mattress with pillows, but no sheets. Beside it was a machine that I didn't recognise, all polished steel and rubber tubes. 2 red lights on a monitor blinked at me as if wondering who I was, and I let the fabric fall back just in case somehow it could see me and sound the alarm. 1 down, 50 or so to go. I peered over my shoulder to see Z on his 3rd screen, moving fast, his determined expression making me pretty sure those ones had been empty too. Simon was standing behind the wheezer, each as motionless as the other. "Come on!" I screamed at myself, moving to the next screen and pulling back the curtain. It was deserted too, except for a stripped bed and another strange machine, this one dead. The next was the same, and the two after that, and by the time I'd reached the sixth cubicle, my sense of dread was fading. I should have known not to let my guard down. I wrenched back the screen of the next compartment and had to rest my hands on the foot of the bed beyond to stop myself from keeling over. Lying on the mattress, held in place by several thick leather straps, was Gary. His top half was bare, several wires taped to his chest, linking him to the machine by his side. It bleeped away softly to a heartbeat that was slow and unsteady, like a clock in desperate need of being wound. Looming above him were 3 skeletal poles, each with a transparent bag hooked into it. One was filled with a dark red substance that had to be blood. Another, the colour and consistency of crap. But there was one more, packed with something that didn't look liquid or solid, that seemed to be both dark and silvery light at the same time. Specks of colour swirled inside it as if caught in some hidden current, or as if impatient to flow down the tube into one of the needles lodged in Gary's arm. Aside from the IV drips, he looked untouched. Bruised and cut from the river, yes, but with none of the stitches and swellings I'd seen on Simon or Monty or the other freaks. Except for his eyes. His head was tightly bandaged, the gauze layered from the bridge of his nose to the top of his forehead. And there were 2 crimson circles right where his eyes should be, like that part of his face had been drawn in crayon by a toddler. Even as I watched, I could see the circles spreading outwards, too much blood for it to be a graze. The scene blurred. I realised I was crying. I turned to look at Simon, hoping he'd be able to do something to make this all better. But he had his back to me, his gaze never leaving the wheezer. Z too was focused on his job, a quarter of the way up the room already and a hell of a lot paler than he'd been a few minutes ago. I wiped my eyes, let the curtain fall. Gary hadn't heard me. He certainly hadn't seen me. I doubt he'd even been conscious, especially if he'd just had surgery on. I couldn't even think about it. I moved towards the next compartment. What else could I do? If there is time, if we can find a way to make it work, then I'll take you with us, Gary, I thought silently. And even though I knew it wasn't true, it made me feel better. There was a cry from behind me, a muffled retching. Spinning around, I saw Z stumbling away from a screen, his hand to his mouth. He tripped over his own feet, falling, and too late, I noticed the trolley of equipment in his path. "No!" hissed Simon, propelling himself across the room so fast I barely saw him move. He dived to catch Z, but didn't make it. And with a crash that could have woken the dead, the 2 boys slammed into the cart. It exploded across the room, shedding pans and scalpels and things I didn't recognise before grinding to a halt on its side. The reaction from the wheezer was instantaneous. It came to life like a clockwork toy, its movements staggered and exaggerated, its cry wet and weak before breaking free of its throat as a scream. "Hide!" Sorry. "Hide!" shouted Simon, pulling Z across the floor by his collar and vanishing behind a screen. I half turned, half tripped across the room, knowing I should have ducked into one of the cubicles on my side, but unable to bear the thought of being on my own. I risked a glance as I ran, saw the creature starting to turn, its pipe popping free of the wall with a hiss. Then I was past the curtain, Z and Simon by my side, surely out of sight. At least that's what I thought, until the wheezer shrieked again, the crunch of its boots growing louder as it headed our way. Oh dear, oh no. The next chapter is called Specimens. So, I'm going to stop there because I'm just really going to start coughing again. I can't even remember what happened in this chapter. Exciting. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. Sorry about all the coughing. So annoying, isn't it? I'm sure I'm not the only one with a cough right now, though. I think a lot of people are suffering, although I don't think I have a virus or anything. I just think I have a cold. But anyway, I hope you're well. Thank you very much for joining me on this latest leg of the journey. And yeah, it was much nicer reading those chapters the second time when I knew you'd all be listening, rather than just to myself. I'll see you tomorrow, everyone. Have a lovely day. Bye.